Hello, everybody. Kay Crystal Griffith here. Hey, I'm earlier than normal. So glad you're able to join us today for Emotions, Wisdom, and Your Body. Every day for 2021, we're delving into how your emotions are affecting you physically, emotionally, mentally. We want to make sure that you are in the know. So here's your disclaimer. I am not a doctor. I do not play one on TV. And this is super important for our topic today, just to remind you of that. I'm a researcher. I have my master's in education, as well as several trauma certifications and inner healing accreditations. This is for your education, edification, and encouragement. So what is then our topic today? Because it seems kind of important, and it is. Today's topic is actually a 3-for-1er. So we're going to talk about obsessive compulsive, as well as obsessive compulsive disorder and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Boy, that's a mouthful, but all wrapped up in obsessive compulsive behaviors and the differences between them. So let's get started. There is obsessive compulsive versus really obsessive compulsive disorder. So OC versus OCD. This basically terms perfectionism and OCD, and they're really used interchangeably, but they're not really the same thing. So perfectionism is a personality trait. It's characterized by high expectations and standards. And if you didn't catch our perfectionism talk yesterday, be sure to grab that one and you'll understand a little more. Well, obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, is a psychiatric condition where a person experiences really intrusive thoughts and or repetitive behaviors they're unable to control. Now, don't worry, I'm going to break this down for you in layman's term in just 1 second. Then I want to go through a couple of other pieces to the definition before we do that. So I can talk today. Perfectionistic tendencies may or may not be a symptom of OCD. So just because you have OCD, you may or may not be a perfectionist. Okay, so they're not automatically interchangeable. That's what they're trying to get across to you. Any relation to an organizational, perfectionistic, or controlling tendencies really has nothing to do with obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, Psychology Today shares anxiety-inducing intrusive thoughts or intrusive images or even intrusive impulses, which really fall under obsessions, are followed by a ritualistic behavior. That could be tapping, counting, repeating, turning the light off and on, turning around in a circle, washing your hands, going to get hand sanitizer 14 times before you have to leave the room, going to check if you hit something, going to check your wallet and making sure that that is where it needs to be. So any of those ritualistic behaviors. So it's not just a once, it's a multiple time event for the same behavior. Okay. Now, those behaviors are called compulsions, and those are controlled basically by the anxiety that's free flowing through the body in that moment. All right. So that's a little more than just being obsessive compulsive. So OCD, the disorder, those people who suffer from that disorder must perform rituals just right. But the perfectionism is limited in the ritualizing. It's not about a reward system. It's just about, I have to do this. I'm compelled to do this. They are not driven by pathological core beliefs about the need for perfection, over attention to details, or control in all realms of their life. Whereas a perfectionist is. Okay. So this indicates a condition of personality, given the inflexible, maladaptive need for global perfection and control. Quite different than what we're talking about with just perfectionism. So these obsessive thoughts are often violent. They could be sexual. It could be fearful in nature. And the thought may change depending on the situation or more in the moment. But once they've entered the mind of someone who actually has OCD, you basically will do anything to get them out of your mind. So if that means your mind is then telling you have to turn that light switch on 18 times, you will stand there and turn it on and off 18 times. But that brings us to the next piece, because you can't get rid of them, okay? Then you have obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Now this has moved into another level, okay? And this is where people are compelled by that compulsion to live by their preoccupation, which is their obsession. So now they're compelled to live in that moment of flipping the light switch, of doing circles, of tapping, of repeating numbers in a certain way. right? That's also dealing with rules, details, schedules, control, and perfection. And all of those filter into the obsession as if my world could not live unless it existed on my calendar, right? And there's a big difference between, oh, I forgot to put that on the calendar, to, oh, it's not on the calendar, I can't do it. It has to be on the calendar, I can't do it. And so there's a real fine line to being able to understand there's a perfectionist piece to obsessive compulsive piece right here. Okay. And this is why I want to remind you, I'm not a doctor. Okay. I'm giving you education and research today. And if you feel like these apply to someone that maybe you know, or you want to delve into a little deeper, I am going to encourage you to reach out to a licensed professional counselor or to your doctor and learn some more. There's some testing that can be done to evaluate what's going on and really what level it is, if there is something going on. Now, the person performing these compulsive behaviors typically do so because of those obsessive thoughts, and they do not find emotional or psychological relief with the actions. And that's what I was just describing to you. Just to flip on that light switch 18 times does nothing for them. It does not release the thought. It does not release the drive. It does not release the compulsion. They have to keep doing it. And then they'll do it. They'll move from that compulsion to another compulsion because they can't stop the compulsions. And we're going to talk about what's going on in your brain in just a second for these. If they are aware of the actions or able to observe them, they're still not able to stop them from performing the actions, no matter how detrimental they are to them or those around them. So let's just do a quick review about the three big areas that we're talking about here. So we're talking about obsessive compulsive behaviors. These are perfectionistic behaviors for high standards, utilizing control. Okay, that's just obsessive compulsive behaviors, right? They're not diagnosed on the DSM-5 or any psychological drive or mental health issue. You're just obsessed with making sure that you have these high standards. And that in itself is probably rooted trauma that you could get rid of and you'd be fine immediately. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder, right, is the person who experiences these intrusive thoughts and or repetitive behaviors, and they are unable to control them. And the behaviors must be ritualistic in perfection to solve a need, but it never really solves it. Now, then there's obsessive compulsive personality disorder. That's your third one. People live by these preoccupations, by these obsessions with the rules, the details, the schedules, the control, and the perfection. All right. So I just want to remind you again, just education today. Okay, guys? So is this positive or negative? As you can probably tell, there's a lot of negativity around this one. So what is actually going on in the brain up there? Now, this is a lot of great information, and you're probably going to be drinking from a fire hose, because I was when I really got delved into this. So I really want you to feel free to go back and revisit this video. Okay. Now, anxiety alters your brain chemistry. It makes it very hard to focus, extremely hard. Anxiety being your prefrontal cortex, and that's where your executive processing is. Now, when that anxiety hijacks from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, it basically makes it almost impossible to focus on anything positive, let alone the future. So it's not really your fault that you can't distract yourself from these thoughts or that you're having them at all. Now, people with OCD, they know they're doing something that doesn't need to be done. I know I don't need to flip that light switch, right? Or I know I don't need to turn on and off the light. I know I don't need to wash my hands. I just did it 14 times, right? But they just can't seem to stop their behavior. It's like their foot is on the brake telling them to stop, but the brake, it isn't attached to that part of the wheel that can actually stop them. And that's according to Dr. Kate Fitzgerald. Now, that's because your brains are affected by obsessive compulsive disorder. They're overly responsive to communication errors, and they have less functionality in areas that regulate that impulse control. So let me just repeat that. So basically, your foot's on the pedal, your foot's on that brake going, gotta stop, gotta stop, gotta stop. But that brake is not attached to the wheels. And so in your brain, the wheels have to keep on turning, even though you're saying stop. And there's a disconnect there actually in your brain. Now, OCD, that disorder, actually disrupts communication between the prefrontal cortex and another part of the brain known as the ventral striatum. Now, while the prefrontal cortex regulates executive processing, your problem solving. That ventral striatum plays an important role in what motivates and rewards us. Now, there's a big connection to dopamine. And so if you missed our introvert and extrovert talk, go back and catch that one, because we talk a lot about the dopamine piece, which actually lives right there. It's what motivates us and what rewards us. Now, usually the ventral striatum and the prefrontal cortex work together. They solve our problems in a logical way that then rewards us, motivates us to continue making those good, strong, rational, logical decisions. But interject OCD, and then we have an interruption to that communication. And those two parts of the brain are not in alignment. They're not working together anymore like this. They're kind of like this, or actually like this. And they're not even talking to each other. Remember, just like the brake to the wheel, they're not connected, right? Now, let's see. So while the prefrontal cortex is regulating that problem solving, the ventral striatum is doing the motivation and the reward, okay? When we have that interruption, what then happens? You then come up with a solution yourself. Your brain does. Enter the OCD. And it tricks the brain into thinking that, well, if we do these little compulsions and rituals, that'll solve the problematic obsessive thoughts instead. So now you're trying to solve it in your brain, but your brain's really not doing anything that's really helping you. And what we need to do is get those two pieces, the frontal and the ventral, back together, working together in cohesiveness. So then you're making strong, motivated, logical decisions. Now, typically when your brain takes over and tries to trick you like that, it's usually just temporary. Maybe you've got a lot of stress going on. You just need to get you something through the situation. But what happens is for a long, stressful period of time, and we're going to come back to stress in just a second, but for a long, stressful period of time, that ventral striatum, it motivates the OCD then. It motivates that sufferer to keep trying those rituals again and again and again and again. It's almost like your brain gets addicted to what it's trying to do to solve the problem. Isn't that interesting? So OCD diminishes the amount also of your gray matter in the brain. So it's making people with OCD less able to control their impulses. Lower levels of gray matter can also change the way you process information, making you more likely to obsess over those bad thoughts, whether you intend to or not. Now, the amount of gray matter that any one person has can be determined not just by what everybody is born with, but if you have concussions, if you've had a traumatic brain injury, you have addictions, all of those can actually diminish your gray matter. So it's super important that we do stay as healthy as we can, because we need to keep the amount of gray matter that we have. Now, the third part of this is your OCD can also diminish your serotonin levels, thereby increasing your favorite A word, anxiety. So serotonin is that chemical messenger in your brain that helps regulate your mood and your aggression levels, which aggression is part of that ritualistic behavior we were just talking about. So OCD affects your serotonin levels, and you may feel like you're constantly on edge and that you can never really calm down. High anxiety, almost hyper anxiety. Being hyper aware that your environment can make you more susceptible to OCD compulsions, like excessive washing of your hands, counting, or even organizing. You know, a lot of people think pregnancy, when you're in your last month, you go into that nesting phase. Oh, you're so OCD. No, nesting and OCD, radically different things. I just want to take the pregnancy people off the table here. Okay, guys. Now, what if you have too much? What if you have too many obsessive thoughts? And what about those fears? And they lead to the individual practicing compulsive repetitive behaviors. Those intrusive, reoccurring, uncontrollable thoughts and behaviors, they're going to limit the person's daily ability to enjoy any kind of life. And it can also lead to other anxiety disorders. And again, just education here, folks. But those could lead to things like panic disorder, which we're actually going to talk about tomorrow, PTSD, phobias, social phobias, or even generalized anxiety disorder. Now, let's talk about some things that maybe are going on in life that could lead to OCD, though. So those were the things that OCD could lead to, but it can go the opposite way. So there are other mental health issues that can lead to obsessive compulsive behaviors, such as body dysmorphia disorder, hoarding disorder, obsessive hair pulling. It's the T word that I can't pronounce to save my life. There's also the skin picking disorder. Asperger's syndrome or autism can actually lead to OCD, but I want to be crystal clear. It's super important in what I researched and what I evaluated. They are not in tangent, they are not in alignment, and you can be on the spectrum and not have OCD. Okay. Now you're more prone because your anxiety level is raised when you're on the spectrum automatically, and so you're more prone to possibly having some of those behaviors, but that does not mean it is for sure. Okay, I just want to be clear to that. You could also have a gambling disorder that leads to OCD, a love addiction or obsessive relationship. Post-traumatic stress disorder can go both ways, actually. Underlying medical conditions such as Huntington's disease actually can lead to OCD. And then substance-induced OCD from an addiction or even prescription medications, that your life can't live without those particular things happening. And that can lead to those compulsive or ritualistic behaviors. So, okay, all well and good. We have these three major things that we're talking about, obsessive compulsive, and they range from really perfectionist controlling behaviors all the way to a whole personality disorder. So where's the middle ground and how do we help, right? So the first step in any situation, folks, is accepting where you are. You have to accept what's going on in your life or you can't even begin to fix it. And so accepting where you are and being aware is the key. And yes, it is something that you'll still need to work for and towards as a cure. But while you're working on that, think of it similar to being sick like with a cold. Okay. You don't get mad at yourself for sneezing, and you shouldn't try to fight your thoughts or see them as part of a bad part of your personality. But you're still dealing with the cold itself, right? You're still dealing with the consequences, the effects, and how do you help that? And that's what we're really talking about here. So this is obviously really hard for some people, and some are going to require some additional support from therapy. And then another really cool piece to journaling, and I've stressed journaling before, is writing out not only the positive things, but the negative things, the persistent thoughts. And that's really what we're focusing on for OCD journaling, is persistent thoughts, those things that I feel like I need to go do this. But why? Why do I feel like I need to go do that? And so as you begin to write out those persistent thoughts that kind of nag you all the time, you're going to be able to identify them. So when they come up again, you can acknowledge them and then move forward. Sleep, exercise, reducing day-to-day stressors, that's good for all of us at any given time with any emotion that we're working on. And those are really going to help eliminate your anxiety and obsessive thought patterns. I can tell you personally, I've seen in my household on a daily basis, it feels like, if certain people do not get protein at a certain time, you're laying out your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, and if there's a little bit too long between one meal and the other, they go into that little commercial that we all see as hangry, right? And that then becomes a whole nother issue. And so super, super important that you are making sure you're consistent with your schedule, because just getting off of it just a little bit actually can create a lot of problems for you in your anxiety realm. And we know this is completely anxiety driven as well. So cognitive brain technology, this is called CBT. This is a sleeve that actually targets your frontal lobe, and that's where all your emotions tend to be hijacked, causing the anxiety. And so once the hijacking is subdued, though, the brain calms down and the anxiety is much more manageable or even relieved. So, I would encourage you, if you want to reach out to me and talk more about that CBT sleeve, it is an amazing piece of technology that's drug-free and a pattern that absolutely affects your brain like that. It is just amazing to see the effects, and it's so helpful for so many people. Our last opportunity to help is called your inner heart healing. Allowing God to get in there and find out where the root of all those behaviors are, the anxiety, and process the emotions around some event that created the anxiety, and deal with the agreement that somewhere was made subconsciously that this is going to serve me and serve me well. And yet we know it's not serving you at all. And so we want to help you identify what that is so we can work on it. Now, what are our freedom verses? 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has given us a spirit. I'm really going to try this again. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of sound mind. That doesn't mean a mind full of obsessions and compulsions or rituals, but of sound mind. Psalm 4:8 I will both lay me down in peace and sleep. For you, Lord, only make me dwell in safety. You know, oftentimes our anxiety is rooted in that fear of safety, of security, of lack even. And so if we can bring safety and unity and understanding to those areas, that anxiety diminishes greatly. Our last one is Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers, whatever so is true, whatever things are honest, whatever things are just, pure, lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there be any virtue or if there be any praise, think on these things. And that goes back to renewing the mind. The more we renew the mind with the positive things, the more we're creating new neuroplasty to focus on the positive things. It's amazing what our brain does, isn't it? So how are you going to use this new information on OCD and obsessive compulsive and then the personality disorder? Now, this is not for you to go around diagnosing all your family and friends. Okay, I know. Several of you already had some friends of mine, didn't you? I know, I see you. Now, this is for you to take as an education and go, did you know I learned about this? Like, this is so cool. What do you think? And just let it be out there. Have a conversation around it. But this is not the time or the place for you to go, I really think you need to go see a doctor because I really think you have some OCD. And they're going to go, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. Bye, see ya. And they're not going to listen to you. So I just want to remind you, education, edification, and encouragement. Okay, guys? So let's just think about you for a second. How has this emotion of obsessive compulsive been showing up in your life? Has it been positive or negative? And how can it transform by using wisdom, understanding, application, and knowledge moving forward in the future? Go live, share with us. What did you learn today about obsessive compulsive? Tomorrow's word is panic. And that's what many anxiety-driven issues are really caused by, is panic. All right, so let's talk some more tomorrow. Join me for more on emotions, wisdom, and your body. Register at kcrystalgriffith.com to receive more insights and your feeling wheel. Can't wait to see you guys tomorrow. Take care.